Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
The Thunder Demon's Straw Hat Luffy by AaronTaichou. This is a story where Luffy ate the Rumble fruit, a logia-class devil fruit, and became a lightning man instead of a rubber man. Luffy also showed signs of haki at a young age, so Shanks decided to take him with them to train Luffy. Godlike Luffy. More serious/smart Luffy, who acts more like a captain, and quote-unquote. I don't own anything. Adios.
Chapter 32. Angels and God. Luffy was the first to leap from the ship to go explore the Island of Clouds. As he landed on the shallow Sea of Clouds, the rest of his crew also leapt from the ship and followed him. Usopp and Chopper began playing in the shallow water like Cloud, while everyone else began making their way to shore. As Luffy's feet touched the shores of the beach, he froze along with Zoro, Sanji, and Negico. It was this feeling washed over the four of them, causing them to stop in their tracks. "What's wrong with you guys?" Nami asked as she and the rest of the crew stopped when the four of them stopped. Before Sanji, Zoro, or Negico to respond to Nami, Luffy spoke up. "Nothing, just surprised at how big this Sky Island is," he said in a calm tone before shooting a look at the other three, causing them to nod their heads slightly in understanding. "The Sky Islands I have seen are much smaller compared to this," he added as he turned his attention back to his crew. "Yeah, this place is something to behold," Negico said as she walked up and stood next to Luffy. "Well, what are we just standing around here for?" Usopp suddenly said with a large smile on his face. "Let the relaxation begin," he yelled as he pumped his fist in the air before he took off running onto the beach with Chopper and everyone else except the four who sensed something earlier. The four who stayed behind looked at each other and didn't say anything aloud, but were all thinking the same thing. "Someone is using haki to watch us," was the common thought among the four. "Stay on your toes," Luffy said cryptically to the three, causing them to nod. "And watch out for one another," he said while staring at the other four members of his crew. The three of them nodded their heads, understanding the message that Luffy's sending. The four of them then waited to join the rest of the crew. As they were walking, they heard a strange bird call over their heads. When they looked up, they saw the south bird they caught on Jaya fly over their head while shooting them a dirty look. "I wonder how he got free," Sanji wondered aloud as he lit a cigarette. "Who cares?" Zoro said as he resumed walking. "We don't need him anymore," he added. The rest of them just shrugged their shoulders before continuing their way. When they arrived at the spot on the beach where the rest of the crew were, they saw Usopp building a sandcastle in the clouds while Chopper was rolling around on the ground taking in the softness of the clouds. Robin was laying against a palm tree reading a book, while Nami, who took her shirt off in favor of a bikini top instead, was laying on a chair made of clouds in a nearby cabana. As they arrived, Sanji took off in the direction of some flowers he saw growing by the beach. Luffy went and leaned against the same palm tree that Robin was leaning against and pulled his straw hat over his eyes. Negico followed her sister and also took her shirt off, revealing a blue bikini top before making her way to the cabana to be with his sister, while Zoro, on the other hand, decided to go investigate something he saw on the beach. He bent down and picked up something fluffy that was on the beach. "What's this?" he asked. He picked up the object. As he held it up to inspect it, the object started to move, startling him. He quickly released the creature, causing it to fall onto the ground. The creature landed on all fours before looking back up at Zoro. Upon careful inspection, Zoro could see that the creature was a little white fox, but at the same time, it wasn't like any fox Zoro had ever seen before. "Huh, what do we have here? Some kind of fox?" Zoro asked as he stooped down to inspect the creature. Just as he was inspecting it, the beautiful sounds music filled the air, getting everyone's attention. "Huh? Is that music?" Luffy asked as he raised his hat from his face. "Look," Zoro said while pointing off in the distance of the beach. "There is someone over there on that cloud," he said, causing everyone to look down the beach where he was pointing. When they looked, they saw a figure standing on top, a tall good looking out to the white sea. "Oh great, it's another monster," Usopp said in a scared voice. By now, Luffy had already gotten up from his position under the palm tree and went to stand where Zoro was standing, with Robin following behind him and the rest of the crew joining them as well. "It's not a monster," Sanji said in a disbelieving voice. It's an angel," he said in an astonished voice as he stared at the silhouette of a beautiful woman with wings playing the harp. "An angel?" Usopp replied in a disbelieving voice as he turned his attention to the woman. The girl then finished the harp and turned and looked at the crew with a smile before she spoke. "Hesso," she said, warmly confusing everyone. "Hesso?" Negico asked with an eyebrow raised. "What's Hesso?" she asked. "Do you think she is trying to say hello?" Chopper asked. "It does sound like hello," Zoro suggested. Before anyone else could say anything, the girl spoke once more, this time to the fox instead of the crew. "Sue, come here," she said to the fox, who began trotting over to her when she called it. Did you come from the Blue Sea world? The girl asked the crew as she started walking towards them. Yeah, Luffy replied to the girl. Then I would like to welcome you to Skypia's Angel Beach, she said warmly. My name is Conus and this little one is Sue. She is a cloud fox, she said as she bent down to pick up the little white fox. If you need anything at all, please let me know how I can be of service, she added with a smile. Even though her words seemed genuine, Luffy could sense that something was off about her. Actually, we have tons of questions, Nami said as she stepped forward. Most of us have never been to a place like this before, she said as she walked up to Conus. Guys, Zoro suddenly said, getting their attention. Something is coming, he said as he looked out to the white sea. Oh, that's just my father, Conus said with a smile. When they looked out the men heading towards them, they saw that he was riding on a strange contraption on top of the clouds. Conus, Nijiko said, getting her attention. What is that thing that your father is riding on? She asked as she stared at the strange machine. Oh, that is my father's Skywaver, she said, amazing them. That's so cool, Usopp and Chopper said simultaneously. Get out of the way, Conus's father yelled out as he approaches the beach. Stopping this thing is kind of tricky. He yelled as the waver started to wobble on the clouds. Ah! He yelled as the waver skid onto the beach and crashed into a palm tree. Is everyone okay? The man asked as he shakily stood up. You're the one who crashed, Nami and Zoro yelled back at the man. That must be the boat we read about in the Nolan the Liar book, Nami said as she stared at the waver. A boat that can sail with no wind, she added in a surprised voice. Did you make some new friends, Conus my dear? The man asked his daughter as he began to pick up the waver. Yes, they arrived only a few moments ago from the Blue Sea world, she said, causing the old man to chuckle a bit before he spoke. Oh, still adjusting, he said with a chuckle. There must be a lot of things that puzzle you about the white sea, I'm sorry, he said. No need to apologize, Usopp replied to the old man. Forgive me for not introducing myself, my name is Pagaya, he said. So, father, how was the fishing today? Conus asked her father. Oh, quite a successful venture, he replied as he saw Nami walking towards while staring at his waver. I have an idea. You all should come over for dinner. We will fill your bellies with the tastes of the island, he suggested, causing the Straw Hats to get excited. Sounds good to me, Luffy replied with a nod. He was skeptical about these people, there was something off about them. So, he decided to go along with whatever they were planning for now until he can figure out what's going on. Besides, if they were stupid of his crew, then he would slaughter every living soul on this sky island. It was then Nami's voice broke him out of his thought. This boat, she said as she bent down to examine the waver. It doesn't have any sails to catch the wind, and just now you weren't rowing it. So how did you get it to move? She asked Pagaya. Oh, that's right, you people from the Blue Sea world don't have dials, Conus said while looking at Nami. What are dials? Chopper asked. Conus and her father then began explaining what dials were and the different kinds of dials to the crew. After they finished explaining it to them, Nami decided that she wanted to try and ride the waver. Much to the surprise of Pagaya and Conus's surprise, Nami was actually pretty good at riding the waver. Is it okay if I stay out here and ride some more? Nami asked. It is fine, just be careful, Pagaya yelled back at her. And don't cause any trouble, Luffy added. After that, everyone began following Pagaya and Conus back to their house for dinner. They began walking up a giant set of stairs made of clouds that seemed to lead into the island from the beach. As they were walking up the giant stairs, Pagaya began explaining to the different types of clouds they had on Skypia. It was fascinating to hear about how they differ from the normal clouds that the crew is used to. Even Luffy found this knowledge interesting. He had no idea that the island clouds that were made from special particles that are in sea prism stones. When the group got to the top of the stairs, Nijiko pointed out the amazing view, causing everyone to stop and look back down at the beach where they came. They could all see a small silhouette of Nami riding around on the waver. Everyone then went into Pagaya and Conus's home. Sanji followed Pagaya into the kitchen while the rest of the crew made themselves comfortable in the living room. As they were all relaxing in the living room, Robin decided to ask Conus a variety of different questions about Skypia. After conversing with each other for about 30 minutes, Sanji and Pagaya finally came into the living room with the food. Ladies and gentlemen, I present you sky lobster with special sauce and a side of island fruit that I can't pronounce, Sanji said as he placed the delicious looking food on the table. That looks so good, Usopp said as he started to drool slightly. Let's dig in, Chopper added. While everyone else is eating, Sanji walked out to the balcony to smoke. While there, he looked out to the white sea for a few seconds before he turned and spoke to the crew. Hey, do you guys know where Nami is? He asked. She's out there riding on the waver, Usopp said while gulping down the food. I can't see her anywhere, Sanji replied as he continued looking out. She probably just went out too far, Zoro suggested. Luffy, on the other hand, could see that both Conus and Pagaya looked more worried than his crew. Do you think she is okay? Conus asked her father in a slightly worried tone. I have my concerns, Pagaya replied. By now Luffy had placed his plate down and was staring at the two citizens of Skypia. Why are you two so worried? Luffy asked in a calm voice as he stared at the father and daughter. On the clouds, there is a place called Upper Yard, Konis explained with a worried look on her face. No one is ever allowed to go there, and it is not too far away. It would only be a short trip by waiver from here. I am afraid your friend Nami might have set ashore there out of curiosity, she explained. By now Nijiko had begun to worry about her little sister. What's so special about this island that no one is allowed to go there? Robin asked as she took a bite of her meal. It is a sacred land, Konis said, surprising them. But more importantly, it is the island where God lives, she said, causing everyone except Luffy's eyes to widen in shock. Luffy did not look shocked by that information. He had a look as though he had just remembered something. I knew I forgot something, Luffy suddenly said, getting everyone's attention. On Skypia, you Skypians call the ruler of this place God, correct? He asked. Yes, how did you know that? Pagaya asked Luffy. Some friends of mine came here about 20 years ago, Luffy said, surprising the father and daughter. I had heard their stories about this place and its people, he said with a small smile. I'm sure you all saw the sign when you came here. God Land Skypia, Konis said, still sounding a bit worried for Nami. This land is ruled over by the almighty god Enel, she said, causing Luffy's eyes to narrow slightly. Could it be this Enel guy who knows hockey? Luffy thought to himself. He knows and sees everything, Konis continued in a slightly scared voice. He is truly omniscient. He keeps his all-seeing eyes focused on everyone, always, she said as she looked down slightly. So, what you were saying is, he is watching us right now, Zoro said as he narrowed his eyes along with Sanji and Nijiko. Yes, Konis replied as he turned and looked at the swordsman. So Konis, if this god is really named Enel and this upper yard is so close to here, you must have seen what he looks like, right? Oh no, Konis replied in a slight panic as she raised both of her hands up in the air. Upper yard is sacred ground and a place only for our god to rest. We are not allowed to go there, she said quickly as though she was hoping not to anger this god. Do you know the punishment of going to this forbidden place? Robin asked as she looked over to the duo. It is our belief that if you break the rules and go to the upper yard then you won't return back alive, Pagaya said grimly, causing the crew to narrow their eyes. It is why I am just as worried about Nami as the rest of you, he added. Luffy, Sanji said as he looked at his captain. I know, he replied as he stood up and placed his plate down. Let's go, he said, causing the rest of his crew to stand up as well. The entire crew then began making their way back to the beach where their ship was docked. When they arrived on the beach, they all got onto the Going Merry except for Pagaya, who stayed on the beach. Let's set sail for this upper yard, Luffy commanded. I think that is going to be a problem, Pagaya suddenly said, getting their attention. When they looked over at him, they saw he had his finger in the air as though he was checking the wind. There seems to be no headwind blowing. If you were to set sail at this time you would spend an extraordinary amount of time getting to the upper yard, he in an apologetic tone. And how long exactly is that? Nijiko asked. It is exponentially longer than it would take if your ship was powered using our dial energy, Pagaya replied from the beach, causing Luffy to sigh in frustration as he looked at the old man. Luffy, can't you just fly over there? Nijiko asked as she looked at her captain. I could, but before I do that I need to know where there is, he replied before he turned his attention back to the old man. In which direction is this upper yard, old man? He asked. The old man thought about it for a few seconds as though he was contemplating whether it was a good idea to tell Luffy. However, just as he was about to give Luffy an answer, someone shouted from the giant stair, getting everyone's attention. You there? Someone shouted, getting the crew's attention. Stay right there, they ordered. When everyone looked up at the stairs in the distance, they saw a group of men marching towards them. Are they talking to us? Sanji asked as he lit a new cigarette. When the group of men got to the beach, they laid flat on their stomach and started to crawl towards the crew. What's up with them? Zoro asked as he stared at the group of men crawling towards them. Are they soldiers? Nijiko asked with a bewildered look on her face. Whoever they are strange, Usopp added. When the men got in front of Pagaya and Konis, who hopped off of the ship when she saw the men, they held up the index and pinky fingers of their left hand and placed in front of T. They spoke. Hesso, all of them said in unison. Hesso, gentlemen, Pagaya and Konis replied. Well, look what we have here. A man in front of the group, who clearly was their leader, said. You must be the Blue Sea Dwellers who have been breaking the rules of the sovereignty that is Skypia. Prepare to have the weight of heaven's judgment brought down upon you. He yelled as he looked at the Straw Hats. Luffy just raised his eyebrow and stared at the soldiers before hopping off the ship along with the rest of the crew. Oh, and what rules have we broken? Luffy asked as he walked up and stood right in front of the man. You have illegally docked your ship on Angel Beach. That is a Class 8 offense, the leader said. Seriously? Luffy asked while looking at the man. No one said that we couldn't dock here, he added. What's the punishment for this crime? Robin asked. 10 nights in the local jail, the man replied, causing everyone to start laughing. He thinks we are going to spend 10 nights in jail, Nijiko said while laughing. Let's forget these idiots and go find Nami. Sanji suggested while Luffy nodded his head in agreement and began walking away from the soldiers. We still have the problem with the wind thing, Chopper said as the crew huddled together trying to come up with a plan. Are we even sure she is at this upper yard place? Zoro asked. Yeah, what if she just taking a joyride somewhere? If we leave now and she comes back we might miss her, Usopp said. The crew continued to discuss their current problem with Nami in detail while ignoring the soldiers, causing their leader to become very angry. Ignoring the white berets, the leaders suddenly shouted, "That is a 9th class crime." He yelled out, causing Konis and Pagaya to gasp in shock while the entire crew just turned and narrowed their eyes at the men. "Why don't you shut up over there?" Nijiko said to the leader. "Before we come over there and shut you up," Zoro added as he placed his hand on his sword. Threatening the white berets. "That is the 7th class crime," the leader said. Luffy was about to say something, but before he could the voice of Nami got everyone's attention. "Hey!" Nami yelled out. "I'm back," she said as she rode closer and closer to the beach. She rode onto the beach and carefully placed the waver in front of Pagaya. "Thanks for letting me use it, it rides great," she said with a grateful smile before he walked up and stand with the rest of the crew. "Who are these guys?" she asked. "A couple of idiots who are trying to charge us with a bunch of bogus crimes," Nijiko replied. "How dare you?" the man said very angrily. "We are part of God's guards. We answer directly to God Enel's priest," he said, causing Luffy to chuckle slightly before he walked up and stood directly in front of the man before he spoke. "You make it sound as though I am supposed to be afraid of you, God," Luffy said in a menacing tone. As he said that, a loud thunder boomed overhead, causing everyone to pause. The Skypians had a fearful look on their faces while the Straw Hats had a confused look on theirs. "Was that thunder?" Luffy asked as he turned and looked back at his crew, who nodded their head and looked at him as though to ask if it wasn't his. "It's God Enel," Konis said in a fearful voice. Well, that is interesting," Luffy said with an excited smirk. "Okay, God Enel. Now I'm intrigued," he said before he released a wave of Conqueror's Haki, knocking the white berets out cold. Chapter 33. A Battle on Angel Beach. "Was that such a good idea, Luffy?" Nami asked with a slightly fearful look on her face. While she was out on the waver on the water, she saw what this God Enel can do, and it terrified her. "Normally I would say no, but this is far too interesting for me not to," he replied as he turned around and looked at his crew. "Was that you just now, Captain?" Robin asked as she looked at Luffy, questioning him about the thunder they just heard rumbled in the sky. "No, that wasn't me," he replied, surprising them while confusing the two Skypians. "Is it possible for two of the same?" Sanji began to ask before he was cut off. "No, it is not possible," Luffy replied, cutting Sanji off. He didn't want this Enel guy to know he had a lightning devil fruit. He wanted it to be a surprise. "It is likely similar but not the same, hence why I'm interested," Luffy said with a smirk. He was about to say something else, but before he could, Konis spoke up in a panicked tone, getting all their attention. "Don't you guys understand what you have just done?" she asked in a slightly scared voice. "This is a crime of the 5th degree," she said, trying to make them understand. "Once you are found guilty of committing a 5th degree crime, Almighty Enel will banish you to the land of the drifting clouds," she said in a soft but scared voice. "That doesn't sound so bad," Sanji said as he smoked his cigarette. "It's a death sentence, you die," she yelled back in a worried voice. "They will put you in your ship on a drifting cloud and leave you there with no chance of escape, and you will eventually die a slow and painful death," she said, starting Nami, Usopp, and Chopper. "I've known you guys for only a short time, and I know you are not bad people, so you should take this chance that you got and get out of here," Konis screamed before running off. "I must get these men to a doctor now," Pagaya said as he walked over to the unconscious soldiers. "I think we would take her advice," Nami said as she turned and looked at Luffy and the crew. "While I was out on the waver, I saw it for myself. An island filled with monsters," she said, scaring Usopp and Chopper. "Great, you did the one thing everyone expected you not to do," Zoro said as he folded his arms. "You mean the island where God lives and we are not supposed to set foot on or go anywhere near," Luffy said with a smirk. "This isn't anything to be getting excited about, Luffy," Nami scolded. "If we stay here any longer, we could get Pagaya and Konis in trouble," she added. "What difference does it make if we stay or leave?" Luffy said in a serious voice. "There is no guarantee that if we leave, they still won't be charged for a crime. Hell, they may even be charged with facilitating our escape," he said, causing a few of his crew members to nod their head in understanding. "The world isn't a black and white place, Ms. Navigator," Robin said while looking at Nami. "This god doesn't appear to be someone of fairness and reason. Just look at all the crimes we were charged with. A lot of them were bogus and made no sense," she added. "It is almost as if they were doing everything in their power to charge us with a crime," Nijiko said, adding on to Robin. "So, there is a chance that if we leave, all the crimes we are accused of will be transferred onto Konis and Pagaya," Luffy said, causing Nami to look down slightly. "Besides, I want to have a little chat with their so-called god," he added lowly. The crew stayed on the beach discussing it amongst themselves for a few more minutes before they made their way towards the ship, leaving Luffy, Zoro, and Nijiko standing on the beach. So much for a nice relaxing vacation, Nezuko said with a sigh, causing Luffy to chuckle. Don't worry about it, he said as he turned and patted her on the shoulder. This shouldn't take that long, we should be done with their so-called god before the log pose resets, giving you guys enough time to relax, he said before he began walking towards the ship. Don't jinx us now, Captain, Zoro said as he too turned to leave with Nezuko following behind. As they were making their way towards the ship, the voice of the captain of the soldiers they encountered not so long ago got their attention. Trying to escape, criminals, he yelled, getting the attention of the three of them along with the rest of the crew who were already on the ship. When everyone looked over, they saw the very same group of soldiers standing on the beach along with Konis and Pagaya. I don't know what it was you did earlier to knock us all out, but I can assure you that it will not happen again, the captain said quite confidently, causing an amused smirk to appear on Luffy's face. For someone who doesn't even know what happened to them, you sure are confident, Luffy said in an amused tone, causing the captain to growl lowly. I hereby find you guilty of committing a crime of the 5th degree. In the name of Almighty Enel, you are banished to drift in the clouds for all eternity, he yelled out. I'm so scared, Luffy mocked in a bored tone, causing the man to grit his teeth before he gave out an order to his soldiers. Men, arrest them, he ordered out, causing the group of soldiers to step forward with arrows and bows. Luffy raised his eyebrow at this while Nezuko and Zoro stepped in front of him with both of their weapons drawn. Fire the milky arrow, the captain commanded, causing all the soldiers to release the arrows from their bows. As the arrows sailed towards the 3 straw hats, it left a trail of milky white smoke behind it as if it was a missile. Nezuko and Zoro leapt forward and skillfully dodged the incoming arrows, while Luffy simply took a step to the side, allowing all of them to miss him completely. As the arrows sailed past the 3, they immediately realized that there was something wrong with the smoke left behind from the arrows. It wasn't until Nezuko and Zoro landed on top of the supposed smoke did they realize what it was. It's clouds, Nezuko said as she and Zoro tried to get their balance on top of the stream of clouds. That's interesting, Luffy said in a bored tone as he continued to stand on the beach. Right after he said that, the second group of soldiers wielding a variety of swords and knives along with the strange skates similar to the ones the masked man was wearing that allowed him to skate on the clouds, leapt up from the beach and landed on the streams of milky white clouds and began skating towards Zoro and Nezuko. The two of them were about to attack the oncoming soldiers, but before they could, the voice of their captain stopped them. Hang on you two, Luffy said before he leapt forward and landed on an unoccupied stream of clouds between the two of them. Luffy then thrust his right palm forward at the incoming soldiers. The soldiers saw him do this and paid it no mind because they didn't see any sign of an attack heading towards them. Then suddenly an invisible force struck the oncoming group, knocking them all back and off the streams of clouds that they were taking on. The captain, Konis, Pagaya, and Luffy's entire crew were bewildered by this point. What the hell was that? Nezuko asked. That's a more advanced form of armament, Luffy replied as he turned and looked at the two of them. That's beside the point, however, you're not ready for that, he said before he reached into his coat and pulled out 2 blindfolds, causing Nezuko and his first mate to stare at him as if he was crazy, as they already figured out what he was about to tell them. Here, put these on, Luffy said as he handed them the blindfolds while at the same time completely ignoring the looks on their faces. You can't be serious? Zoro asked as he stared at his captain. Luffy just looked at him and held out the 2 blindfold with an unreadable expression on his face. We could die, Nezuko yelled. Then don't die, Luffy replied with a shrug, causing everyone's jaws to drop. You all need to get stronger at a faster pace. I plan to conquer the Grand Line, bring the 4 emperors to their knees, onto pirates, Luffy said in a serious tone. For me to do that I need the strongest people on my crew, he added, causing the two of them to stare at him for a while before Zoro shrugged his shoulders and took the blindfold. You can't be seriously thinking about trying this? Nezuko yelled, asked as he turned her attention to Zoro, who was in the process of tying the blindfold around his eyes. If this is going to help me become the strongest swordsman in the world, then I'll do it, Zoro said strongly. If this kills me then it wasn't mean to be, he added as they tightened the blindfold. I'm surrounded by crazy people, Nezuko grumbled to herself before taking the blindfold from Luffy. Just so you know, if I die here today, I'm going to haunt your ass, she said, causing Luffy to chuckle before returning to his position on the beach. As he landed, he turned his attention to his crew, who were all staring at Zoro and Nezuko with a worried expression on their faces. The rest of you don't worry, Luffy said, getting their attention. Your time will come, he said with a smirk, causing a shiver to travel down all their spines. Robin might prove to be most difficult to train this way, with her being able to spawn eyeballs wherever she wants to, Luffy thought to himself before returning his attention to the upcoming fight. Contrary to what his crew may believe in this situation, he won't allow any of them to die. After hearing the rumbling of thunder in the sky, it made it aware to Luffy that the so-called god of Skypia had a lightning-based devil fruit. He had been purposely not using his devil fruit because he wanted to see the look on the poor bastard's face. He saw Luffy's logia fruit. Given the fact that this Enel's fruit seems to have a lightning element, it was either a paramecia or a mythical zone type. neither of which actually posed a threat to Luffy, but they could fetch a pretty high price on the open market and sometimes an even higher one on the black market. Luffy smirked to himself at that thought before his face turned serious once again and looked on as the fight was about to begin again. The captain of the White Berets stared at his men climbing back onto the streams of clouds, getting ready to attack once again. He had no idea what had just happened to his men. One moment they were attacking, getting ready to deliver Almighty Enel's scared judgment, and then the leader of this group of criminals leapt forward and just thrusted his palm forward. At first, it looked as though nothing had happened, but not even 2 seconds later all his men were sent flying back as though they were hit by some invisible force. The leader of the White Berets just didn't understand what was happening. Blue Sea dwellers are supposed to be weaker when they first arrive at a sky island due to them not being accustomed to the thin oxygen present here at this altitude, the captain thought to himself as he stared at Luffy through narrowed eyes. Just how powerful you have to be down there to come all this way up and still be a force to be reckoned with, he wondered. Doesn't matter though, they're all ants in the eyes of Almighty Enel, the captain whispered to himself before focusing his attention back to the fight that was about to take place. Negico and Zoro each stood on a different stream of clouds with their blindfolds on and a large group of soldiers rushing towards them once more. Negico had her 3-section staff held behind her back as she tried to use her remaining 4 senses along with her observation haki to try and tell the attacks would be coming from. Zoro on the other had only had 2 of his swords drawn instead of his usual 3. In his eyes, these soldiers weren't worth all that effort, and with him being an experienced swordsman he was confident he would be able to avoid any attacks that came his way along with replying with a suitable counterattack. That's not to say that he wouldn't be using his observation kaki. He absolutely will be using it, was just that he was confident that he would be able to survive even without it. Both him and Negico calmed their nerves and began trying to fell out their enemies with observation haki. When the soldiers were about 50 feet from the two of them, both of them dashed forwards at an amazing speed to meet their enemy. Negico swung her 3-section staff diagonally from right to left across her body, effectively slamming the top section of her staff onto the head of one of the soldiers who were wielding 2 knives. She then flipped forward and landed a different stream of cloud in which caused her to become surrounded on all sides by soldiers. Negico then began spinning her 3-section staff around her body like a pair of nunchucks before he jumped and twisted her body around in the air and started spinning midair before she shouted out, "Demonic whirlwind!" she yelled out. As soon as she yelled out her attack, numerous wind blades shot out in all directions, hitting the soldiers who had previously surrounded her. There were more wind blades than there were soldiers, causing a lot of those blades of pressurized wind to hit unsuspecting soldiers who weren't anywhere near her. That was quite a powerful attack, Luffy thought to himself as he saw Negico's attack. But it lacks control, he added as he turned and looked at a slash mark that was in the clouds beside him. Some of Negico's wind blades had made their way towards him and the surrounding area around her. It was clear that it was a new attack of hers and she didn't have that much control over it. Thankfully, none of the blades reached the crew, who were all on the ship looking on in awe, especially Nami. She couldn't believe that her sister had gotten that powerful. It made her want to get stronger too, that way she won't be left behind by her sister. The remaining soldiers charged towards Zoro, who was running on the stream of clouds, to meet them with both of his swords drawn. As he was running, Zoro held both swords in front of him pointing up, like rhinoceros horns, before he began to spin, slashing the air around him. 2-sword style. Rhino cycle. Zoro yelled out, causing wind blades to fire out in the direction of the incoming soldiers, knocking them all into the air and onto the beach. Both Negico and Zoro then stood still for a few seconds before taking their blindfolds off to see unconscious White Berets scattered out all over Angel Beach. What's the point of even blindfolding them if they're just going to use such wide-range attacks? Luffy said to himself with a sigh as he shook his head. Good job, you two, he then said, getting their attention. Before any of them had a chance to speak, the voice of the leader of the White Beret got all their attention. Sorry criminals, he said loudly, getting everyone's attention. You should have done what I told you to do. Of all the upholders of the law here on Skypia, we of the White Berets are the most lenient. However, they are not nearly as forgiving, he said, causing Nami to gasp and a fearful look to appear on her face. Ha ha ha, congratulations, you are now considered second-degree criminals. You can try to cry for mercy, but you will all be judged by the priest of Upper Yard, he said while pointing at Luffy and the crew. Luffy just shrugged his shoulder before ignoring the man completely. Haven't these people realized by now that we don't really care? Luffy said as he walked up to Zoro and Negico. For what it's worth, I'm really looking forward to experiencing God's judgment, he added with a chuckle as an exciting look crept up onto his face. Chapter 34. Upper Yard, the beginning of the end. Luffy, Zoro, and Negico began walking towards their ship to join the rest of their crew, leaving a beach scattered with unconscious soldiers behind them. When they arrived on the ship, everyone gathered around to plan their next move. Luffy, is it really such a good idea to anger this Enel guy? Nami asked in a slightly scared voice. Something got you worried, Nami? Luffy asked as he leaned against the banister of the ship and looked at his navigator with a curious expression on his face. It's just that I saw what this Enel guy could do, and his power seems to be the real deal, she said in a scared voice. He made a giant beam of light come down from the sky and kill a man who was there looking for gold, she said, causing Usopp and Chopper to become scared. It kind of sounds like what you did, Luffy, when you made that marine base island disappear back in the east, Sanji said, causing Zoro to nod his head, recalling what Luffy had done. It does sound similar, but at the same time, it sounds like a weaker version. Luffy replied with a nod, causing Chopper to look at him with stars in the eyes. Luffy, you're so cool, Chopper said as he stared at Luffy with stars in his eyes, causing Luffy to chuckle and pat the little reindeer's head. Don't worry, Nami, Luffy said as he turned and looked at her. I won't let anything happen to any of you, he said with a smile, causing all of them to smile as well. Besides, this sounds like it could be a good training exercise for all of you, he added, causing them to go pale and the smiles to disappear from their faces. Luffy was about to continue speaking, but before he could, the voice of Konis got everyone's attention. I feel the need to tell all of you something, Konis said, getting everyone's attention. When everyone looked out from the ship, they saw her standing beside the ship looking up at them with an unreadable expression on her face. There is a cloud current that I can lead you to, which will take you directly to the White Sea and from there to Cloud End, where you can safely return home, she said, surprising everyone while at the same time causing Luffy and Robin to narrow their eyes in suspicion. Once you get onto the current, no one will be able to chase you, she added. That sounds amazing, Nami said excitedly. Luffy plastered a fake smile on his face before he too spoke to Konis. That does sound great, thank you, Konis, Luffy said with a fake smile as he looked down at her, causing some of his crew members to look at him strangely. Tell you what, we need supplies to repair our ship and we need some food for the journey. Do you think you can help us with getting these things? He asked with the fake smile still plastered on his face. Of course, she replied without hesitation. Great, Luffy replied happily, causing his crew to become slightly scared due to face that they have never seen their captain like this before. Why don't you go getting everything prepared and some of the guys will come to help you bring everything back to the ship, he suggested. Okay, she replied before began making her way back to town. As she was walking away, Robin spoke up to Luffy. Captain, she said. I know, Luffy replied as he turned to look at his crew, dropping the fake smile in the process. She is setting us up for a trap, he said, surprising the remaining members of the crew. What? The remaining Straw Hats yelled out in shock. Don't be ridiculous, Luffy, Nami said, not wanting to believe that the sweet, innocent girl that had been helping them up until this point was setting them up for a trap. Konis did nothing but help us until now. Why would she set us up for a trap? She asked as she stared at her captain. Yeah, Captain, Nijiko said, agreeing with her sister. Don't you think you were being a bit too paranoid? She added, causing Luffy to raise his eyebrow at her. I had to say, Luffy, Usopp said, getting his captain's attention. She's been nothing but nice to us all this time. I find it hard to believe that she would try to set us up, he said, causing Luffy to sigh while in the corner of his eye he could see Sanji getting ready to burst. Yeah, Konis is too beautiful to be bad, the cook yelled while pointing at Luffy. However, bad could be good, he added with a perverted giggle, causing Nami and Zoro to smack him over his head. Perverted cook, Zoro mumbled, causing Luffy to shake his head. You guys are too naive, Robin suddenly said, causing everyone to look over to her. When comparing her speech patterns and behaviors before when she first met as to her interaction with the captain just now, one could clearly see a major difference in her behavior, she explains while Luffy nodded in agreement. Her words lacked the usual emotion and you can tell she was extremely nervous to speak to us, she continued to explain. She was clearly lying about leading us to the current, she finished. But why would she do that? Nijiko asked as she looks at Luffy and Robin. I don't think she is doing it because she wants to, but is doing it because she was told to, Luffy said while Robin nodded her head in agreement. What do you mean? Usopp asked. Well, let me ask you this, Luffy said before he turned and looked back at the shores of Angel Beach. If your god gave you an order, would you refuse to follow it? He asked, causing a few of them to understand what he meant. Anyway, it doesn't matter, he said with a sigh before turning back around. We'll play along for now, he said, causing them to nod. So, who is going to meet up with her? Zoro asked. Sanji and Usopp will come with me, Luffy replied as he looked over to his sharpshooter and cook. The two of them nodded their heads before stepping forward. The rest of you wait here, and if this god of theirs decides to attack, defend yourself at all cost. I do not care whose blood you have to spill and how much of it you have to spill, just make sure you don't die. Nami, you're in charge until I get back, he said, seriously, getting a firm nod from his crew. Luffy, Sanji, and Usopp then hopped off the Going Merry and began making their way towards Konis's house. When they arrived at Konis's house, they saw Pagaya and Konis preparing mini lunchboxes for everyone along with some other supplies that they thought the crew might need. Here, let me help you with that, Sanji said as he moved over to help Pagaya with the lunchboxes. Usopp went over to inspect the other supplies that were prepared while Luffy simply sat down on the couch and poured himself a drink. Konis and Sanji kept chatting while Usopp and Pagaya were discussing the supplies that were prepared. Luffy, on the other hand, had his observation haki stretched to the max to cover the great distance that was between the beach and house. Everything was going on fine for about 30 minutes when Luffy suddenly sprang to his feet, alarming the rest of the occupants in the room. He did not say anything. Instead, he walked swiftly out to the balcony and looked out in the direction of his ship. Luffy, what's wrong? Usopp asked as he walked and stood next to Luffy. It has begun, Luffy replied as he continued to stare at the ship. Sanji and Usopp both looked in the direction of the Going Merry and saw that the ship was rocking back and forth as if it was in turbulent waters. What's going on with the ship? Sanji asked as he pulled out a mini telescope to get a better look. There is something under it, Luffy answered due to his observation haki already tell him what was under the ship. It seems to be a giant lobster, he added nonchalantly. While the three Straw Hats were discussing what was going on, Konis and her father had a slightly worried look on their faces. It is the Super Express Lobster, Pagaya said lowly to the crew, getting their attention. It is a messenger of Enel, he added with a grim look on his face. Before he could say anything further on the matter, Luffy's voice interrupted him. The ship is sailing away, he said casually, causing everyone to turn their attention. They looked over. They saw that the ship was sailing backward while the sails had not even been released yet. The only conclusion that everyone could come to was that the lobster was pulling the ship. That thing must have been sitting there waiting for us to weigh anchor, Luffy said. What are we going to do now? Usopp asked in a slightly panicked voice. Where is the lobster taking them? Luffy asked as he looked over at Pagaya. It must be taking your friends as a sacrificial offering, Pagaya replied in a slightly worried voice, causing Luffy to narrow his eyes. If that is the case, then it will be taking them to the sacrificial altar located at the northeast of Upper Yard, he said with a grim look on his face. The old man then began explaining to the three of them that their ship and friends were now hostages and the ones who must face heaven's judgment were the three of them to get them back. He then began explaining the layout of the Upper Yard and what they need to do to get there. Even though Luffy was listening, he had no intention of following along with the rules of this game. After all, he doesn't play by anyone's rules but his own. Where can we find a boat to get to this milky road? Luffy suddenly asked with a smirk, startling the father and daughter duo, while Sanji just chuckled. Konis could lead you to the Angel Beach docks where you can acquire a suitable vessel to make the journey, Pagaya replied, causing Luffy and his two crew members to stand up and look at Konis. Well, Konis, we'll be in your care, Luffy said with a fake smile back on his face. The group of four then began making their way to the docks with Konis leading in the front while Sanji, Luffy, and Usopp followed behind. The group walked through what seems to be the main shopping district on the island, a place called Lovely Street. Luffy had to admit, it was an incredibly beautiful sight to behold. As they continued to walk further down the street, the three of them could not help to notice that the patrons on the street were all avoiding the three pirates from the Blue Sea. Wow, people are really trying to avoid us, Usopp commented. What do you expect? Sanji replied. Word probably spread by now that we are wanted criminals, he said. So, nothing new really, Luffy said, causing his two crew members to chuckle. You guys do know that you could die, right? Konis asked as she looked over her shoulder at them. Everybody has to go sometime, Luffy said with a chuckle, surprising her. The group walked for about another 5 minutes before they arrived at the docks of Angel Beach, and by now Luffy understood they were being followed by the leader of the White Berets. Konis led the three of them to the end of the dock where they saw a small boat and the ship of a crow docked. This is your ship, the Crow, she said with a smile, causing Luffy to raise his eyebrows slightly at her. Your exit is gate number 2. It will lead to the Milky Road, she said as she began to tremble slightly. So, Luffy said a bit loudly. Is this where the second part of your little trap is sprouted? Luffy asked, causing the girl's eyes to widen in shock along with the others who were looking on. You knew? She asked in a slightly scared voice. Of course, you are not that convincing as a bad guy, Luffy said while Sanji and Usopp nodded their head. She then dropped to her knees and began to sob before she spoke again. It was me who called the Super Express Lobster on your friends, she admitted between sobs. Once we know someone is a criminal, we must lead them to Upper Yard or else the penalty is death, she added. What do you think you are doing, girl? A random person yelled from some distance away. Are you trying to get us all killed? Another said. Luffy just looked at her with an emotionless look on his face, not saying anything. Suddenly a bright light in the sky got everyone's attention. The surrounding patrons started backing away in fear of what was about to happen. Luffy narrowed his eyes and stepped next to Konis before he pulled her to him and held her close. Just a beam of white light began to come down from the heavens, getting ready to swallow both Luffy and Konis. Luffy simply wrapped one of his arms around Konis and held her close before he raised the other in the air. His palm, which was in the air, turned black for a split second with a strange aura around it before the beam of light impacted his palm. The onlookers had their eyes widen the size of a dinner plate at the sight before them. Never had they ever imagined that they would be alive to witness such a sight. As the beam of light came in contact Luffy's palm, it parted at the point of contact, going around Luffy and never touching Konis. It lasted for 5 minutes before the beam of light disappeared from the sky, leaving Luffy and Konis standing on an island in between a giant hole in the ground. He just withstood Almighty Enel's judgment, one of the onlookers said in shock. What is he? Another asked in shock. Just how powerful is he? The captain of the White Berets asked himself. Konis, who had her eyes closed the entire time, finally opened her eyes to see that she was standing on an island in the middle of a giant hole, causing her eyes to widen in shock. Before she could say anything else, she felt herself being picked up by the waist, causing her to let out an eep, before she was thrown into the air, causing her to scream as loud as she could. Once again, before she could process what was going on, she felt someone grab her midair. When she looked to see who it was, she saw that it was the Sky Knight. "Keep her safe, old man," she heard Luffy said. "This one is on the house, young man," the Sky Knight replied. Luffy nodded his head before leaping out from the small island and landing next to Sanji and Usopp. "I knew you were powerful, but I didn't know you were powerful enough to stop one of Enel's attack," Gonfal said with astonishment ever so present in his voice as he stared at Luffy. Luffy just gave a small smile and looked up to him. "You Skypians need to stop looking down on us Blue Sea Dwellers," he said loudly for Gonfal and the onlookers to hear. "As powerful as I am, there are still people out there who are more powerful than me," he said, causing Gonfal to nod his head in understanding while the onlookers looked on in shock. There are people more powerful than him, they all thought to themselves. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Sky Knight," Luffy said before he walked over to the small ship that Konis had previously prepared for them. "I got a god to go kill," Luffy said before he hopped into the small boat with Sanji and Usopp behind him. 3 of them hopped into the boat and began sailing towards gate number 2. The trio sailed up the milky white stream of clouds for about 5 minutes before a giant forest came into view. "Whoa," Usopp said as he stared at the upcoming forest. "Is that giant forest the upper yard?" he asked as he stared on in astonishment. "Just look at the size of those trees," he added as he stared at the gigantic trees. Luffy had to admit, even he had never seen trees this big before. As they got closer and closer to the forest, they began to see the entrance. It was decorated with torches and spears with animal skulls stuck into them. "This must be the entrance," Luffy noted as the small ship sailed through the milky road that led to the forest. As they got further through the entrance, they saw what appears to be multiple shipwrecks, but the only difference was that these ships were all sliced in half. "What could have sliced these ships like that?" Sanji asked as he stared at the numerous destroyed ships. As he said that a giant sickle came swinging in, poised to slice the tiny ship in half. "Watch out," Usopp yelled as he stared at the approaching sickle. Luffy just unsheathed his sword and swung it in front of him horizontally, effectively slicing the giant sickle in half, causing the bottom half to fall into the cloud sea while the top half to miss the ship completely. "We're safe," Usopp ssigh of relief. "We're not out of the woods just yet," Luffy replied as he pointed in front of them at the multiple giant sickles swinging across the stream. "They must have set up multiple traps to kill off the weaklings," Luffy suggested as both he and Sanji walked to the front of the ship. "I'm kind of insulted that they think so little of us," Sanji said as he held up his right leg while adding armament hockey to it from the shin down. "You and me both," Luffy replied as he held his sword up to his eyeline. An annoying set of traps later ***, the trio avoided all the traps and deadly sky fishes that tried to stop them advancing, and now they were sailing towards a giant statue with 4 entrances. "Which entrance should we take?" Usopp asked as he steered the boat. "Ordeal of Balls, Ordeal of the Swamp, Ordeal of String, and Ordeal of Iron. Which should we choose?" he asked. "Is it just me, or do none of these things actually sound like much of an ordeal?" Sanji said as he stared at the upcoming entrances. "Let's go with Balls," Luffy said as he sat down at the back of the boat. "It sounds the least threatening," he added. Usopp nodded his head before he began to turn the boat in the direction of the entrance that had "Balls" written above it. The small boat then set down the pitch-black tunnel. "I can't see a thing," Sanji said as he squinted his eyes to try and get a better view. "What if this is like one of those games?" Luffy said, getting Sanji and Usopp's attention. "You know, like you pick the right door and you get a prize," he said casually. "And what if you pick the ring door?" Usopp asked. "Well, it could be something like if you pick the wrong door you fall off the island," Luffy said casually, causing his 2 shipmates to go pale. Soon a light at the end of the dark tunnel began to shine through the darkness. When the ship set out of the tunnel, they saw that at the end of the tunnel was indeed a drop-off that showed no bottom. "Damn," Luffy thought as his eyes widened slightly. The small boat then proceeded to fall out of the sky, causing everyone to hold on for dear life. They fell for about 10 seconds before the boat landed back onto what seems to be the Milky Road. "That was intense," Luffy said calmly. He wasn't too worried about falling off the island because he could easily have summoned up a thundercloud to catch their fall and bring them back up to the island. "I thought I was going to die," Usopp said as he laid flat on the floor with tears streaming down his face. When everyone claimed themselves and looked at their surroundings, they saw that they were in a forest with floating balls of clouds everywhere. The Milky Road seems to go through the entire forest, twisting and turning in between the trees. Well then, let's get on with it, Luffy said, causing Sanji to nod and began driving the small boat. As they were sailing forward, Usopp saw on the balls of clouds were coming close to the ship. He then reached up to push the ball away. As soon as he touched the ball, a snake popped out of it ready to bite Usopp's head off. Luffy immediately sprang to his feet and trapped the snake by the head as it was about an inch away from Usopp's nose. "Ah!" Usopp said before he fainted back. Luffy then tossed the snake into the stream before he turned his attention to the right side of the forest where his observation haki alerted him of someone being there. "You might as well come out," Luffy yelled out. "I know you're there," he added. Ho, hoo, someone laughed. "Listen, well children, these are mystery clouds. You never know what will come out of them," a man said as he came floating in on a giant sphere of clouds. "I am so glad you chose my ordeal, the ordeal of balls," he said happily as he stared at the trio. The man then started dancing around on the large ball in happiness while laughing to himself. He was a round-shaped man with fair skin and long, dark red hair. He was wearing a white, full-body jumpsuit, which has a vertical line of golden rings that run from front to back, an orange hat similar in style to a Capello Romano, orange gloves, shoes, and large, yellow sunglasses that completely obscure his eyes. "Stop dancing and tell us who you are," Sanji yelled out in frustration. "Nami and the others better be okay or else I'm going to rip you apart limb by limb," Sanji added darkly, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow at him. "It is official, I am a bad influence on people," Luffy thought to himself as he sighed. "Oh, the sacrifices," the rather large man said with a jolly smile. "If they escape, they will die, and if they are sacrificed, they will also die. Ho, hoo," he said happily, causing Sanji to growl. "If you wish to get to them, you first need to defeat me first, which is something I don't see happening. Ho, hoo." The man mocked before he leapt from the large ball in which he was standing and began floating in the direction the small boat which the three Straw Hats were on. "He is heading this way," Usopp yelled out. "Quick, Sanji, Luffy, do something," he said in a panic. Sanji stepped forwards and raised his left leg, preparing to kick the large man. "Oh ho, a left kick," the man said as he got closer. Sanji did not pay him any mind. He simply aimed a kick at the man, expecting to hit him right in the midsection. Much to his surprise, the man's body moved just enough midair to dodge Sanji's kick completely. Even though he dodged Sanji's kick, the man did not notice Luffy appearing right next to him. As his head turned slightly and he saw the Straw Hat wearing pirate standing to his left, his eyes widened in shock before he was sent flying back in the direction from which he came in courtesy of a backhand from Luffy. "He knows observation haki," Luffy said as he watched the man collided with one of the giant trees. "You should be able to handle him given the training you had," Luffy added as he turned his attention and looked at his two crew members. "What do you mean as two?" Usopp asked, not really liking the sound of Luffy's previous statement. "I'm going to leave him the two of you to handle while I go look for the others," Luffy said with a smirk, sending shivers down Sanji and Usopp's back. "Think of it as a little training exercise," he added. "Is now really a good time to have a training exercise?" Usopp asked, causing Luffy to chuckle. "Of course, no time like the present," Luffy said with a smile as he began calling his thundercloud. "It should be a good experience for the two of you. You finally get to fight someone who is somewhat proficient with observation haki. This will help you improve your own haki along with your battle prowess." Luffy finished just as his thundercloud pulled up right beside the boat. "Good luck," he said before stepping onto the thundercloud. "What if we die?" Usopp asked in a panic. "I don't know," Luffy said with a shrug. "Walk it off," he said, a smirk causing Usopp to go pale. "Relax, Usopp," Sanji said as he lit a cigarette. "It two of us and one of him. We'll be fine," Sanji said, causing Luffy to nod his head. "Yeah, and both of you know haki. You'll be fine," Luffy said, trying to encourage Usopp. "Just imagine how Kaio will react when he hears how the bear warrior of the sea Usopp defeats one of God's priests on an island in the sky," Luffy said, using Usopp's weakness to push him further. "That's just dirty," Sanji thought to himself as he stared at his captain and shook his head. "Yosh, have to fear Luffy. Captain Usopp will defeat all of his foes," Usopp yelled out as he pointed up to his heavens and struck a pose, causing Luffy to chuckle. "That's the spirit," Luffy said before he walked to the back of his thundercloud and sat down on the throne made of clouds. "Good luck, you two," he said, causing them to nod at him before his clouds sped off into the skies above Upper Yard. "Where do you think you are going?" came the voice of the priest who Luffy previously sent flying. The large priest leapt off from the ground hoping to stop Luffy, but before he could reach the cloud, something hit him upon impact. "Exploding star," was the last thing Luffy heard before the cloud ascended to the skies above the Upper Yard. When the thundercloud was about a few hundred feet above the giant forest, Luffy gave it an order to hover at that level for a bit. He then sat back in his throne and closed his eyes, allowing his observation to activate at maximum capability. He sensed everything that was going on the island. He knew where everyone was, how many people there were on the island, and what they were doing. Zoro, Robin, and Nami were currently walking through the forest, no doubt to try and find the rest of the crew. while Nejico and Chopper were back on the ship doing some repairs. Luffy could sense that someone was approaching the two of them, but he was not worried because Nejico would be enough to handle whoever it was by herself. Chopper being there only added to their advantage. Everything was under control, even Sanji and Usopp were having the upper hand in their fight. Luffy was incredibly pleased with the progress of his crew. He could just sit back and pour himself a drink while his crew takes care of these priests. He decided to focus on Zoro, Nami, and Robin because it seems as though they discovered something remarkably interesting. Thanks to his observation, Luffy heard everything they were talking about. Luffy found it interesting that this upper yard was once part of Giant and it got knocked up into the sky, the knock-up stream. Must have been one hell of a knock-up stream, Luffy thought to himself as he heard their conversation. He then poured himself a drink and looked off towards the center of the island and smirked. "I know you're watching. Enel," he thought with a chuckle. Luffy then sensed a large group of people heading towards the upper yard at high speed, causing him to narrow his eyes. "Looks like a lot of people want to have an audience with this god," Luffy said to himself before taking a sip of his whiskey. "Too bad he won't be alive much longer," he added. He then sensed that Sanji and Usopp had defeated that priest and was starting to make their way towards the shrine where Nejico and Chopper were. Speaking of, it seems as though Nejico and Chopper managed to kill the priest who they were facing, causing Luffy to smile. He then willed the cloud to go to their direction. Everyone was already heading in this direction, so it would be the best place for him to be at. When the cloud was directly over the shrine, Luffy stepped off it and began falling towards the ship. He was worried about the act that he was a few hundred feet in the air. He had a calm look on his face while holding onto a glass of whiskey. Like a cat, he then landed softly onto one of the banisters of the upper deck, surprising Chopper and Nejico. When he landed there, and he looked at the ship, his eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. "What the hell happened to my ship?" he yelled out as he saw there were multiple holes in the hull and the ship was missing its mainmast. "Luffy!" Nejico and Chopper cried out in happiness. He had tears in his eyes as he ran towards his captain before leaping up into Luffy's arms. "Luffy! I'm sorry!" Chopper cried into Luffy's chest. "That priest spear lit the mast on fire and I tried to put it out, but it wouldn't go out. So, I had to break it off and throw it into the water," said a crying Chopper. Luffy just sighed and smiled before patting the little reindeer on the head before he spoke. "All that matters is that you're okay," Luffy said with a warm smile, causing the little reindeer to wipe away some of his tears. Luffy then placed Chopper down before he made his way towards Nejico. "What about you, are you okay?" he asked as he stood in front of her. "Yeah, I'm fine," she said, sounding a bit tired. "That guy was a bit more troublesome than I had first imagined with his strange javelin and strings," she said while pointing over to the dead body of a man lying on the main deck with a hole in his chest. Luffy walked over to him and looked at his dead body before chuckling. My, you sure know how to steal a man's heart," Luffy said, a chuckle as he pointed out that the priest was missing his heart. He then walked over the man's weapon and picked it up to examine it. After looking at it for a few seconds, he crushed the javelin, causing a small red seashell to fall out. "Is that one of those dials that Konis told us about?" Nejico asked as she walked up and stood next to him. Luffy bent down and picked up the shell before he replied. "It would appear so," he said to her as he examined the shell. "Interesting, very interesting," he added before he turned his attention back to the ship. "I'm starting to regret not paying closer attention to what was going on here on the ship," Luffy thought with a sigh. "Sanny and Usopp should be here by nightfall, assuming they don't run into any more priests," Luffy suddenly said to Nejico and Chopper. "And Robin, Zoro, and Nami should be back at about the same time," he added. "How do you know that?" Nejico asked as she stared at Luffy with an eyebrow raised in the air. "I was up there watching all of you," he said while pointing to the thundercloud that was a few hundred feet above the ship. "Kind of regretting not paying closer attention to you too," he added while looking at the mainmast. "While we wait, Chopper and I will start repairing the holes in the hull," he said as he looked over to the little reindeer. "Go grab some of the supplies from down below deck," he ordered, causing the little reindeer to transform into his heavy point and go fetch the materials they would need. While Nejico and Luffy were waiting for Chopper to return, they heard a series of explosions coming from a different part of the forest, causing both to narrow their eyes. "Sounds like a party," Nejico said as she walked over the dead priest and picked him up. "I had sensed a small army heading towards the island," Luffy said as he looked off in the direction of the explosions. "It was been led by that gorilla that attacked us earlier," he added. "Seems we are not the only ones who have a problem with this Enel," Nejico said before she tossed the priest body off the ship and into the sea of clouds for the sea sharks to have. "Yeah, well, their problem is not ours," Luffy said before he took off his captain's coat and hung it on the side of the ship. He then walked over and picked up a toolbox that was on the main deck before hopping off the ship to access the damage to the hull. "Damn," Luffy said as he stared at the medium-sized hole in the hull. "I don't know how much more of this you can take, Mary," Luffy said with a sigh as he placed his hand on the hull. "Here are some supplies I found, Luffy," said Chopper as he hopped off the ship carrying some wood. Luffy looked over at him and smiled slightly before he began repairing the holes in the hull with Chopper's assistance. The two of them worked on it for about an hour when the sun just started to set. Luffy wiped the sweat off his forehead before he looked off to the left of the shrine where he sensed 3 individuals coming. Out from the forest walked Zoro, Robin, and Nami. The 3 of them looked slightly relieved to see their captain, but that relief turned to shock once they noticed the condition of the ship. What happened to the ship? The 3 of them yelled out. Is everyone alright? Robin asked. Everyone is fine, Luffy replied as he placed the hammer back into the toolbox and closed it. You guys stay over there, he added, confusing everyone. It's getting late, we'll set up camp over there, he said, causing them to nod. Just as he finished speaking, the sound of something hitting the water got everyone's attention. When they all looked over, they saw Sanji and Usopp sailing in on the Crow. After a short reunion with everyone, they all gathered some supplies and made their way into the forest not that far from the shrine and set up their camp for the night. Sanji began preparing the food while Usopp and Zoro got a large bonfire going. As they were setting up everything, Luffy's told him of someone approaching their current location at incredibly high speed. As the person got closer, Luffy realized that it was the Sky Knight. The old man arrived on his weird bird with a worried look on his face. His worried look later turned into a look of surprise when he saw all the Straw Hats sitting around without a care in the world. You are all alive? The old man in surprise. Sounds like you were expecting us to die, Luffy said as he sat down on a giant tree trunk. I knew you were powerful, but I didn't expect the rest of your crew to be just as powerful as well, he said, clearly stating that he had expected some of them to die. What are you doing here, old man? Luffy asked, knocking the man out of his shock. We didn't blow that whistle, he added. Yes, well, I heard that the Shandorians launched an attack against Enel. I thought you all would have been in trouble, he said, causing some of the Straw Hats to smile at him. Well, why don't you join us tonight? Nijiko said as she popped open a bottle of booze. I cannot, the old man said as he waved his hand in front of him. Come on, old man, Luffy said as he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to the old man. Enel is going to die tomorrow. Let's have a drink to celebrate that, he added. Shouldn't we drink after he is dead? Gonfall asked. We can do that too, Luffy replied, causing the old man to chuckle before taking the glass of whiskey and sitting down beside Luffy. You lot sure are confident, he said as he sipped his drink. This so-called god isn't all that powerful, Luffy said before taking a sip of his drink. He is nothing more than an ant pretending to be a dragon, he said seriously as Sanji began serving the food. Gonfall looked at Luffy for a few seconds before he smiled. The Blue Sea world sure is an interesting place, he thought to himself before taking another sip of the whiskey. The crew then all sat around the fire and began recalling the events of the day. Sanji and Usopp started to recount their encounter with the priest who was apparently named Satori. Nijiko and Chopper then followed with their fight against the priest named Shira. To say Gonfall was surprised would be an understatement. He could not believe that this group of kids not only killed 1 priest but 2. It sounded ludicrous to him. Nami and Robin then began telling everyone about what they discovered about this island and its connection to Jaya. Everyone was surprised to find out that the City of Gold did not sink into the ocean like they believed, but instead it shot up into the sky. To say everyone was excited about finding all the gold would be another understatement. As the night went on, the crew began drinking and celebrating at the thought of being filthy rich when they find the gold. Gonfall then decided to tell everyone about him being the former god of Skypia, which in turn surprised everyone including Luffy. He then explains how this upper yard came to be and the legend passed down from generation to generation. The entire crew was captivated by the story he was telling. It was only when Luffy heard him talk about the island singing did Luffy remember about the golden bell that Cricket told them about. That song you were talking about must be the bell that old man Cricket told us about, Luffy said, causing some of his crew members to nod their head remembering what Cricket had said. Well then, old man, Luffy said, getting Gonfall's attention. Lucky for you, I was already planning on ringing that bell, Luffy said, causing old man's eyes to widen before he chuckled and shook his head. You know, you guys remind me of another group of pirates that came up from the Blue Sea world about 20 years ago, he said, surprising Luffy's crew while causing Luffy to smile slightly. That pirate that you are talking about, Luffy said before taking a sip of his whiskey. His name was Gold Roger, wasn't it? He asked, causing everyone to go silent and stare at Gonfall, waiting for him to confirm what Luffy just said. Yes, do you know of him? Gonfall asked, causing Luffy to chuckle while the others look on in awe. The king of the pirates came to Skypia, Usopp said in an astonished voice. We made it here just like Gold Roger, Nami added in an equally astonishing voice, causing Luffy to chuckle at their reaction. I know some people who were on his crew, Luffy said to Gonfall, causing him to nod his head. The crew continued to tell stories and drink for the rest of the night until all of them fell asleep. Next day the next morning the few woke up to the startling discovery of their ship being repaired completely by a mysterious person who Usopp claimed to have seen late last night. It was puzzling to everyone, especially Usopp. Who could it be? He asked as he walked around the deck of the ship. And how did they know what the Mary looked like before we equipped the flying gear to her? He continued to question. Does it really matter? The ship is fixed, Nami said as she folded her arms. Luffy stood on the upper deck starting at the figurehead of the Mary with narrowed eyes. It can't be, he thought to himself as he stared at Mary. He stared on for a few more seconds before shaking his head clear. Luffy, Robin said, getting his attention. There are some ruins located just south of here, where the City of Gold is believed to be. I would like to go examine them, she said, causing Luffy to nod his head. Take Zoro and Nejico with you. I sense those Shandorians are back on the island, Luffy said before he walked down from the main deck. The rest of us are going to try and get the Mary off this shrine before I go take care of Enel. We will all meet back up at the ruins, he said, causing her to nod. Robin, Zoro, and Nejico then set out for the lost City of Gold. Luffy, Gonfall, Nami, Sanji, Usopp, and Chopper then began trying to come up with a good way to get the ship off the altar. Usopp and Chopper tried to pull it off using the small boat that Konas loaned them, but sadly the small boat did not have enough power. After exhausting a bunch of different and creative ways to get the ship off the altar for about an hour, Luffy finally decided to do the one thing he was trying to avoid doing since he came to the island, use his devil fruit. Looks like I got no choice, he thought to himself before he looked at the rest of the crew. All of you get on the ship, he ordered as he took off his captain's coat, puzzling them. What are you going to do, Luffy? Chopper asked in curiosity. I'm going to pull it off, he said, causing everyone to raise an eyebrow at him. But we already tried that, the crow doesn't have enough power to pull it off of the altar, Nami said. Wasn't planning on using the crow, Luffy said as he began unbuttoning the top couple of buttons of his shirt. He then turned his body into lightning and teleported onto the bank directly in front of the stairs of the altar, causing Gonfall's eyes to widen in shock. Luffy then stretched out his hands, causing 2 bolts of lightning to fire out of the palm of his hands and wrap themselves around the figurehead of the Going Merry. Luffy then grabbed a hold on the bolts of lightning and planted his feet firmly on the ground before he began to pull. He's not really planning on pulling the entire ship all by himself, is he? Sanji asked as he stared at his captain. I think he is, Nami said in disbelief. So cool, Chopper said with stars in his eyes as he stared at Luffy. Luffy's feet were beginning to dig into the ground as he tried to pull the ship. His plan was not to pull the ship directly off the altar but only to turn the ship around so it was facing the stairs, that way they could easily slide it off. All it needed to do was rotate the ship. Ah! He yelled as he began to pull harder, causing his muscles to bulge slightly along with some sweat to appear on his face. Much to the surprise of his crew and Gonfall, the ship began to rotate. Yeah, you're doing it, Luffy, yelled Usopp as he felt the ship starting to turn. With a strength, Luffy turned the entire ship 90 degrees so that it was down facing the flight of stairs. Okay, all of you go stand at the front of the ship, Luffy orders as he wiped the sweat from his brow. When everyone stood at the front of the ship, the Going Merry began to tilt downwards a bit, but it still was not enough for it to slide down the stairs. So, while it was still tilting, Luffy gave one final pull, causing it to slide down the stairs of the altar and into the Cloud Sea. Luffy then let out a sigh of relief before letting go of the 2 bolts of lightning, causing them to disperse. Luffy took 2 steps forward before he was stopped when a bring light flashed across the sky. He immediately extended his observation haki to see if the 3 members of his crew were okay. He saw that Zoro and Nejico were fighting the remaining 2 priests, with Nejico already killing her opponent in the same way she killed the last one, stealing his heart. Zoro was shaking a bit of a hard time with his opponent, mainly because he was outnumbered by the number of Shandorians there as well. But it was Robin who made his eyes widen slightly. Apparently, God had paid her a visit while she was exploring the ruins. Without warning, Luffy turned his body into lightning and shot up in the sky to get to Robin. Nami and the crew on the ship stared at the spot from which Luffy disappeared from with a worried look on their face. Where is Luffy going? Chopper asked as he hopped up onto the rails. Something must have happened, Sanji said as he lit a cigarette. That bright flash, it was Enel, Gonfall said, causing them to worry even further. With Robin ***, Robin was currently sitting on the ground with her back against one of the ruins. Her eyes were barely open, and her entire body was covered in nurses and electrical burns. Enel had shown up a few minutes ago and spoke to her about the ruins in which they were in and told her about the gold that was once here before he moved it. When she had mentioned the golden bell, it was quite clear that he didn't know where it was, and when she lied about not knowing what was written on the ruins, he attacked her before leaving, claiming not liking lying women. She was currently staring up at the sky through her half-opened eyes when she saw a bright light forming in the sky before it began to descend, looking as if it will strike her. Thinking that it is Enel coming to finish the job, she closed her eyes and accepted her fate. She waited a few seconds expecting death to arrive, but it never came. Instead of pain, she felt something soft touch her cheek, causing her to slowly open her eyes. When he opened them, she saw a blurry figure dressed in black and wearing a straw hat kneeling beside her. Hey there, gorgeous, she heard the voice of her captain say, causing her to open her eyes a bit more, allowing her to see Luffy kneeling down beside her with a warm smile on his face and one hand rubbing her cheek. See, Captain, Robin whispered out weakly. Shush, Luffy said as he placed his index finger over her lips. Save your strength, he said softly before he examined the wounds all over her body. Don't you worry, Robin, he said as he looked at her. No one is ever going to hurt you again. I promise, he said strongly with conviction, causing tears to well up in her eyes. Luffy then carefully picked her up bridal style and held her close to him before turning into lightning and teleporting back to the ship. Thank you, Robin whispered just before Luffy teleported the two of them away. Luffy and Robin arrived with a lightning strike on the main deck, startling everyone on board. Chopper! Luffy bellowed for his doctor, causing the little reindeer to run down to the main deck. Robin! Chopper yelled when he saw Luffy carrying Robin in his arms. He quickly ran down the stairs with his little doctor's bag to treat Robin. The rest of the crew followed behind him, rushing to the side of their fellow cremated. Luffy laid her down on the main deck for Chopper to treat before walked over to the side of the ship and picked up his captain's coat.
What happens to her? Chopper asked as he examined all her wounds. She is covered in electrical burns, he noted. Apparently she had a run with God, Luffy said in a low tone as he swung his captain's coat around, allowing it to only rest on his shoulder before he turned and looked at his crew with anger ever so present on his face. This so-called God has the audacity to harm a member of my crew, Luffy said in a chilling tone as sparks of lightning began phase in and out around his body and the once milky white sky to darken with thunder clouds. The thunder clouds completely blocked out the sun, making night appear during the day. Lightning flashed across the sky, periodically striking around the forest of Upper Yard, and each bolt of lightning was followed by its own deafening thunder that shook the entire island and was even heard by those down in the Blue Sea world. I've never seen him this pissed, was the thoughts of the Straw Hats who were staring at Luffy. Well then, let the slaughter begin, Luffy said in a cold, emotionless tone as he clenched his fist, causing sparks of black lightning to surround his body.